All right, guys, let's talk about security. Now, we need to secure all of our devices, and we have a lot of different types of threats and vulnerabilities and crazy stuff going on out there. That's why cybersecurity is one of the top paying industries, even within IT, right now. We have all these cool devices, we have all of this data going back and forth everywhere. Well, we've got to secure all of it. So let's jump into security threats and vulnerabilities, and then we'll take the second chunk of this, which is all about how to control and implement some safeguards for us. So we're going to start with all the most common security threats. Then we're going to look at the controls. We have to take a look at mobile because our cell phones are getting attacked now too. As well as if there is a time and place to destroy data, well, what's the most effective way to do that? So the first thing I want to talk about is a virus. Now, a virus is not everything that can go wrong. Now, most of us use this word when we should be using the word malware, which is malicious software. A virus itself is a piece of code that spreads from one device to another, and it does this by attaching itself to another file. So a virus is actually a type of malicious software, but not the only kind. We have worms, Trojan horses, these things called logic bombs, and of course our classic spyware, which comes in its own diverse craziness as well. Now, a worm is special because it will actually duplicate itself all by itself, which means it doesn't actually need anything else to wreak havoc on our system. How in the world does it do that? Well, that's what's special about a worm, because it will spread from one device to another and actually open doors for other attacks to happen without you necessarily knowing it. And that's why it can be one of the scariest to deal with. All right, so let's move on to a Trojan horse. Now, I'd say you've heard of this before, but it may have been a while because we're taking the steps necessary to protect ourselves against this type of malware. It is one of the worst and can open doors for some really other nasty attacks as well. But what a Trojan horse is an attack that a user doesn't even know is there. It looks like a legit piece of software and sometimes even just attaches itself to a legit piece of software. But once you open it, execute it, meaning you allow it to install or do whatever it needs to do, the Trojan horse is now on your computer and taking hold. Now, this word or term comes from a piece of history where two countries were at war and they sent what looked like a gift to the country that they were at war with. But little did they know that inside this really cool gift that looked like a huge horse, there were actually soldiers waiting inside of it to attack. So how this got its name is that it looks legit. It looks just fine, and people are happy to accept it into their digital system. But inside of that perfectly fine piece of software is a nasty attack. Now, logic bomb is this piece of malicious code or software that doesn't actually do anything until a later date. Now, this can be something that's set off by an exact time in the future, or it can attach itself to a certain kind of event. So let's say every Wednesday around 1 in the morning, your system does a disk cleanup. That's actually one of the default things that a Windows system will do. But if I wanted to set off a malicious piece of software at some point in the future, so no one could trace it to right here, right now, I might attach it to that event because I know it's going to happen and I can just tell them to run alongside together. So when that disk defrag or disk cleanup starts, my logic bomb will actually go off as well. So there's more kinds of issues that we can face than that, and some more pretty common ones are spyware, adware, and we need to talk about rootkits for sure. Now, spyware you've probably heard of, and hopefully you don't have it on your computer. But the fact is, you do. Your ISP is watching you all the time. Now, that's a legal piece of spyware, so we actually just call that tracking. But when it's an unauthorized user doing this, and it's malicious, meaning that they're trying to track stuff that they're not supposed to, that means they are spying on you. And a lot of times they're trying to grab your personal information or your financial information and really just do nasty things to your life. So spyware is bad. And we'll talk about in troubleshooting why tracking is okay and can be good. Adware is, well, advertisements. And this is something that we can't necessarily get away from, but we want to make sure that, again, it's not malicious, meaning we don't accidentally install some kind of program that's going to cause pop-ups and slow down our system and just be annoying in general. Now, ransomware is definitely something that we're dealing with more and more and more. This is any type of code or attack that's going to restrict my access to my own data. Most of the time, ransomware is going to ask you to pay a certain amount of money. And they promise that when you pay it, that they'll actually remove the malicious software and let you get your data back. Now, first and foremost, you should always be backing up your data. And if you're not, you are susceptible to lose a lot of stuff. Not to say if you do back up your data, you won't get hit by ransomware. But if you do, at least you have the opportunity to have a backup that you can implement on a different system and deal with the ransomware as you're able to, instead of completely losing any productivity or the ability to operate. Now, rootkit may be something new to you. This is an administrative level backdoor per se that is not authorized. That means that somebody can take control of your system and you'll never even know about it. They can hide themselves from any type of detection because they're above the administrator. They're root. And for those of you that love coding or other operating systems, quote unquote, meaning you understand what sudo means, then you're probably familiar with the word root. But for this level, we're going to keep it really simple. This means the most advanced access in a computing system. So you can have a rootkit implemented for non-malicious purposes, meaning you have a virtualization system and you're trying to monitor what's going on. But for the most part, whenever we talk about this being implemented in a malicious way, the point for the hacker or attacker is to take control of your system without you even knowing it. All right, spam is definitely something you've heard of before, so let's teach you about something new. Have you ever heard of SPIM? S-P-I-M. Well, this is spam, just like normal advertising and annoying stuff, but SPIM is delivered via instant message, where spam is delivered via email. So that's something new for you. You may have been spammed in the past. Somebody sent you a message that you really didn't care for. You don't want to buy their product or go check out their website, but you'll see it, and you need to be aware of the different kinds of spam and spam that are out there. Now, social engineering is really, really common. You've probably been social engineered by a significant other or a coworker and didn't even know it. This whole attack is using deception to convince an unsuspecting user to provide the data to allow access to someone else. Meaning, if I asked you, hey, what high school did you go to? And man, what mascot did you guys have? Was it this or that? That's cool, this was my mascot. Well, that's one of the 3 security questions that is used most often to reset a password. So I could ask you about your high school, maybe where you grew up, and if that's where you had your first job, you know, where was the first place that you worked? These are normal conversational topics when you meet somebody and have a conversation with them. You might give up a lot of information and not even realize that you're doing it. Now, the attack really does depend on a human factor, which is why it's called social engineering. So we take the human side, which is honestly the human fault or vulnerability, and we use it to gain technical access. And we can do this in person, we can do it over the phone, even over email or through social media. But our goal is to gain access to something, or the attacker's goal is to gain access to something that they shouldn't really have access to. Now, I want to talk about different types of social engineering really quick, which means I'm going to go back one slide, and then I'll jump into what you saw. So really quickly, a few types of social engineering. Shoulder surfing. This is literally when I'm just going to look over your shoulder and watch you put in your password or your PIN number or whatever it may be. And once I see it, then I can turn around and use that in the future. Now, spoofing can be human or software based, but the goal is to pretend to be someone else. And there are actually 3 words that fall into this category: spoofing, impersonation, or hoax. Now, spoofing can be either human or software based. Impersonation is only human based, where I'm calling you or I'm walking up to your office and telling you that I am somebody I'm not. As in, I am the director of technical services for your company, and I just need you to write down your username, your password, and I need to reset it because someone else is attacking us. Well, if you give me that information and you don't know that I'm the director of technical services, well, I'm impersonating somebody. And a hoax is completely email or web-based, where the point of it is to trick somebody into performing an action that would then give me access to give you a virus or grab your info or whatever it may be. So the 3 are pretty close, but the goal is for you to remember the little bits of information that make them unique. When I'm spoofing, I am pretending to be someone else. This can also mean something else, meaning I'm spoofing an IP address or a MAC address, pretending to be a different piece of equipment. Impersonation is totally human-based, where I'm pretending to be someone I'm not. And a hoax is web or email-based, where I'm trying to trick you into doing something that would give me access. All right, some more popular social engineering methods. Phishing, you've probably heard of this, PHISH, phishing. And this is email-based completely, and I'm going to send you an email from some respected name, maybe a bank or some foreign country leader. You may have gotten this email a few years ago from the prince of a place in Africa who wanted to send you millions and millions of dollars, or some lottery winning of yours, and all they needed was your name and your social security number and your account number and your routing number and pretty much everything they wanted to grab from you to be able to attack you. That is phishing via email. Now, vishing with a V as in Victor, that is the same exact thing, but I'm going to do it over the phone, meaning I'm going to call you and say, hey, I'm from so-and-so bank, and I've pulled up your account and I've noticed that it's been hacked. Can you give me your username and password so that I can verify that you are the owner of the account and I can reinstore your funds? Or reinstate, I should say. Well, if you give them your username and password, they're going to log into your account, and that's probably when you're going to start losing the money. So that is called vishing, V, and that actually stands for voice over IP phishing, which is where the V came from. Now, whaling is phishing, but for a huge target. The goal of whaling is to grab the information via email, but through a very important person, meaning I'm targeting a CEO or CIO or somebody way up in the company that's going to be much more valuable than maybe just picking random targets. All right, so now that we've talked about that, let's jump into the types of attacks that can happen to our technology. And the one that I've actually heard of a lot recently in the news is this thing called a zero-day attack. And this is an attack that is really difficult for us to deal with. Now, it's called 0 day because we've had 0 days to fix the flaw, meaning this thing is brand new. We haven't seen it before. We are not ready to take the challenge, right? We're just not prepared. It's new and we've got to react really quickly. So a 0 day attack is a new attack, and it's called 0 day because, again, we've had 0 days to actually fix it. Now, brute force is exactly what it sounds like. I'm going to brutally attack a password, a field of some sorts. I'm going to try every possible combination to literally just guess your password. And there's software systems out there that can create honestly, every feasible combination of numbers and letters and special characters that's possible in the whole world. And it makes it really easy when you have a 6 to 8 character password because I will tell my software, I need you to come up with every 6, 7, and 8 character combination of all the letters and numbers and special characters available on our keyboards. And then I'm going to try all of those combinations. Well, I won't do it, but a piece of software will do it against whatever account I'm trying to break into. And at some point, one of them is going to work. And to protect ourselves against that, the easiest way is to enforce or enable a maximum attempt rule, which is why after you try and log into something, maybe 5 times or 10 times, the system's going to shut down and you're going to have to go through extra steps. So brute force was really popular back in the day. It still happens pretty often, but the longer your password is and the more complex it is, the less likely it is to be guessed and brutally attacked and broken. A dictionary attack automatically is going to start guessing words that are from the dictionary. Most of our passwords are normal words. They're just easier for us to remember. But that can be a vulnerability because we have software that can guess them. Eavesdropping or sniffing attacks is really easy to implement nowadays. You have this monitoring software that's going to just watch your network communications, and they'll pretty much just steal all of the content from the communication, or at the very minimum, your username and password, and then they'll use it in the future. So once you do your business online, you log into something, you do whatever you need to in the system, and you log out, you pack up for the day and you go home, that's when an attacker will take what they saw you do earlier. They'll repeat your credentials, and they'll do whatever they want in that system. Now, man-in-the-middle attack is pretty much an eavesdropping type of an attack. Nothing necessarily needs to be changed per se when they grab your information before they pass it on. It could just be watched. So let me explain this a little bit more. Do you remember playing a game when you were little where you had 2 people that would throw a ball back and forth and one person in the middle that would try and grab it? Okay, this game has different names depending on what part of the country you grew up in, but the objective is for the person in the middle to catch the ball, and they now have, aka the data in this. So a man-in-the-middle attack is the exact same thing. Let's say person A and B are on the edges, and the attacker is the person in the center trying to catch the ball. Now, when I throw the ball, let's say I'm person A, and I'm trying to get the ball to you, person B. Well, without us even knowing it, the person in the middle, the attacker, is going to catch the ball first. They're going to look at all the data in the ball, and then they're actually going to throw the ball to the person B, so to you. Now, in the man-in-the-middle attack on the IT side, we don't actually know that this is happening, or at least the attacker's goal is for us to not know that it's happening. Now, do they have to change anything in the ball? No, they can just pass it right along to you. But the ball wasn't for them, and now they've seen what's in it, which means we have some malicious activity. Now, the worst case scenario is that person actually changes something in our data before passing it along to you, meaning that when I tell you the answer to the question is A, they'll actually change it and say the correct answer is B. They're giving you incorrect information. They've modified the data from when it left me and before it got to you. Now, the reason I take so much more time on man-in-the-middle attacks are, 1, they're incredibly common, and we need to understand how this stuff works and how to protect ourselves. And 2, you will most likely see a few questions about it in your testing environment. Now, I want to talk about the next most popular per se attack, and this is something called the DDoS, Distributed Denial of Service. It's a DOS attack, which is a denial of service attack, but it uses multiple devices on different networks to attack one target, meaning not me attacking you one-to-one. It would be me and my entire group of friends or other bots or zombies, and I'm moving my hands around and you can't even see it, but just imagine me coming with my whole team or crew and attacking one person. So it's not necessarily fair, right? But we know in real life it happens, and it happens a lot in the digital world. And those individual computers, or all the members of the crew, are called zombies or botnets. The botnet is the whole crew together, because you take a lot of different bots or individual computers and you put it together to create a network. And that new network, or everyone together, is going to attack a single target. It's kind of like getting jumped in the virtual world. And countries do this to each other. Literally, America attacks a country, usually after that country tries really hard to attack us a bunch of times. Now, this has been successful on a worldwide scale thousands of times. Sometimes we actually hear about it in the news, but the other 99% of the time, we never hear about it at all. But you need to understand that this is going on all the time. Now, when we get to Security Plus, if you're headed after your cybersecurity certifications, one of the classes you'll be taking here soon is Security Plus. And we will talk a lot about DDoS, distributed denial of service attacks. So let's get back to what we can actually do about this. Well, the first thing anybody should have in a corporate environment is a policy. We have lots of policies, procedures, stacks and stacks of paper and PDFs that you're supposed to read at some point, but you probably just checked the box saying you have read them and kept your life going forward, and have probably never glanced at them ever. But within the configuration settings of Windows, there is a control panel per se to look at your overall security behavior of your entire system. It's in Windows a hierarchical group of different policies that apply to all the nodes or all the devices on your network. There are individual policy entries that can be enabled, configured, modified, disabled, and you should really take some time and get aware of what's going on in your system. All right, so what are the best practices for us to protect ourselves? Well, first and foremost, you need to make sure that your defaults are always changed. When you plug in a system, you're going to have some pretty low level or just crappy username and password. Change it. Make it harder for an attacker to guess, and require all of your users to use stronger passwords than password. Something safe, something that's maybe not in the dictionary, something that's longer and requires special characters. Now, beyond that, anytime an update or a patch comes out, it's for a reason. They found a flaw and they're trying to protect you from it. So make sure that you're installing all of those updates and security patches as they come out. Now, managing user accounts is something that a lot of people overlook. When someone quits a company or gets terminated, they shouldn't have access to the network anymore. And not as tragic, but if somebody changes departments, let's say from sales to HR, that person doesn't necessarily need access to the sales stuff anymore. They just need the new documents in HR that provide information for their new role. So going over these different accounts and making sure that the ones that should be disabled are, and restricting user permissions so that they only have access to what they need, well, that's going to help you a lot in your security stature or profile. Educating your users is one of the things that you should always be doing on a regular basis. Let them know of the new things that are coming out as far as attacks and how to protect themselves. The more they know, the less likely they are to do, well, just stupid stuff on your network and create more vulnerabilities. Now, device security measures are sometimes really straightforward, but sometimes we just overlook the basics. Our cell phones are a perfect example. It is not safe to just have a swipe unlock on your phone. You should have some type of pin or pattern so that when somebody picks up your phone and walks off, you at least have a fighting chance to not have all your stuff stolen. You want to block pop-ups from your web browser and make sure that your firewall is configured the way it should be. And let's talk about digital and physical ports here. If you do not want somebody sticking in some random USB to your company computer and having that USB automatically play, per se, meaning open folders and files, then you can just literally disable the physical USB port, meaning even if somebody sticks a USB in there, nothing's going to happen. There's no access for it to communicate. The same exact thing on digital ports. We talked about those logical port numbers where data is transferred. So let's use the example of the internet. If you only want people able to access secure internet websites, then 80, because port 80 is unsecure web traffic and port 443 is secure web traffic. So if you only want them going to trusted websites, block any opportunity for them to go to untrusted websites. Now, these are simple things, but again, we overlook them all the time. And I think in regards to combining user education and device security, one of the best things to remind all of your employees, coworkers, and you should even be doing this at home, is to lock your screen when you walk away from your computer. This will prevent me from flipping your screen upside down when you're in one of my classes, and it will prevent anyone else from accessing whatever you're working on your desktop. Even if you're just going to grab some water or go to the restroom, lock your screen when you walk away. Now, if you violate these best practices, you need to make sure that you notify the right people, and not necessarily that you're violating them, but just if they're violated in general. Meaning you find something that's wrong or that needs to be updated. Tell the people in IT or the compliance department that match. If you have some automatic install of patches and updates, then that's great on small systems, but that might not be awesome for enterprise environments, meaning that these updates need to be tested first. That's all fine and good, but there should be some responsibility assigned, meaning a certain individual or a certain department should lead the effort to testing these patches and ensuring that they get installed in a timely manner. And anti-malware. This is your antivirus and anti-spyware and all of those anti-horrible thing programs that you have on your computer. Make sure that they're being run on a regular basis to make sure your operating system and all of your applications are safe. Now, even though we are practicing safe security in our digital world, things do happen. And when they happen, we need to report them. And a security incident report is the type of document that you'll be filling out. Now, you may not have all the information as far as the causes and effects, but when you know something goes wrong, you need to report it and escalate it immediately. Now, you might be the person reporting and escalating for someone else, meaning you'll take the call when somebody says, I don't know what's happening, but I can't get to my data, and there's a pop-up on my screen that says I need to go to a certain website. So it might not be your device, it might be a different employee's device, and you're going to fill out a security incident report for them. And you have some of the basic information that is probably going to be gathered for this report. But every company will have their own security incident report rules and fields, and you'll need to ask your employer about what they expect. So now we've got all that digital stuff down, and that stuff is important. How we're going to get attacked and the start of how we're going to try not to get attacked, right? Well, let's talk about each type of control and break it down with some detail. Now, security controls are safeguards. They're pretty much just prevention methods to try and avoid getting hit with any of these crazy things. But if we do, some of our safeguards are actually meant to counteract, meaning an attack of some sort has started, but we catch it early enough to minimize the risk and any of the effects of it. AKA, look at a firewall. A firewall is going to stop the flow of traffic into your network from something it identifies as malicious. Now, it didn't necessarily stop the attack from happening. The data was still sent to you, but it's going to try and stop it in its tracks before it causes any damage. Now, we're going to go over a few different kind of controls here. Physical is first. Procedural controls are definitely important, so we'll talk about different procedures. Digital controls are all the software that we have in place, and we're going to have to talk about some paperwork, all the legal and regulatory and that compliance department that everyone pretty much hates, but they're there for a reason, so don't get mad at them. Now, physical security is just keeping people out that shouldn't be there. This is restricting physical access to a facility. Gates, doors, locks, whatever keeps people out that shouldn't be there. Now, this is also what allows people in if they should be there. So the steps that they need to go through to gain access to that facility. They may have a specific ID or proximity card that they scan. They may have to go through some biometric authentication, meaning they're going to have to unlock a door or gain access via a palm print, a thumb print, voice recognition, retina scans, whatever it may be. But physical access needs to be controlled. If somebody isn't allowed on your premises, that means that they're less likely to steal stuff. And we have some pretty simple things that you can implement here. Like if there's a lock on the door, you should use it. Lock the door. Man traps are something you've been through, but you may not have known the name of them. This is when there are two phases to getting into a building. It could be as simple as the door behind you has to close before the next door opens, or you may actually need a certain piece of identifying matter, whether it's something you have, something you are, or what's the other one? There are three: something you have, something you are, or something you know. Those are the three authentication methods, and I'm going to continuously try and pound those in your head because those will stay with you through all of your certifications, no matter where you go in IT. But anyways, you'll need at least one of those to get through a man trap if they require some type of authentication, other than just letting the door behind you close. Now, logging and visitor access is just to track who's coming in and out of the building, and identification systems can be as simple as a badge or ID, but they can actually get pretty advanced, like having a key fob or a smart card. Now, key fobs are the little devices that you have on your keychain, and they have some information inside of them. So you'll swipe them next to something or hit a button, and that's what's going to give you access. And a smart card is just a little plastic card, but it has a chip on it, and that has a circuit that's built into the card itself. It looks like a normal ID or the new credit cards, but that little gold chip that you see on your new credit cards, this is now a smart card, and it has intelligent memory per se. That means it just has data on the card that can be physically read by the system. Of course, video surveillance is pretty straightforward. That's when you're taking video of everybody who's entering or exiting your property. This is, again, another way to log it. You can have physical security guards in place. You can have gates or some type of physical barrier. You can have cable locks on your devices so they don't get up and walk off all by themselves. You should be securing your documents in a locked place, especially if there's some type of database or control documents that have sensitive information. So putting them into a special room and then putting them into a special cabinet, both of which have locks and both of which have locked locks, meaning the locks are being used, and only the people that should have access have the key. We already talked about biometrics. This is, again, your fingerprint or your retina scan, something that you are personally made of, part of your body. And alarms, the last one here on the list. And whenever something goes wrong, there are different types of alarms, but you need to notify the right people so that they can react in a timely manner. Whew. Now that was a lot, and we're coming to a close for this section, so stick with me. All right, digital security. This is the idea that information that is either created, stored, or transmitted, which, by the way, are the three states of data. It's either being stored, which means it's just being saved somewhere, nobody's touching it. It's being created or modified, meaning I have a document open and I'm typing on it or changing some information. Or it's being transmitted, meaning I'm sending it to somebody. Anyways, digital security protects our data no matter what three of those states that it's in. So this is pretty much how I'm going to protect the data that's on my computer. We start with anti-malware. Whatever malware that we might be facing, we should have a software service or solution implemented to protect ourselves. Firewalls are in place all the time, even if you don't see them. At home, a firewall is integrated into your router. And at work, they actually probably have a separate piece of hardware that controls all of the data flow and scanning of that data to make sure it's approved to make it into your system. User authentication, passwords, permissions, access control lists, all of that falls under your digital security. Now, antivirus and all of your anti-malware needs to be updated on a regular basis so that when it scans the files for any malicious software, it knows what it's looking for. Those updates are called definitions, and that's how antivirus and anti-malware work. They match the patterns of your current data against signatures or definitions to commonly known viruses. And if something matches, they're going to quarantine and start working on getting rid of whatever that matched article or data or file is. That way it can protect you. So we've talked about firewalls a bunch of times, but what does a firewall do at its most basic defining core purpose? Well, it scans all incoming and outgoing traffic, compares it against a list of rules, and if it passes the set of rules, meaning it doesn't violate anything, then it's free to go. However, if any of that data does not pass the sniff test per se, then it's going to kick it off of your network, meaning it's not going to allow an outgoing message to actually make it out, or it's not going to let that incoming data make it in. Now, you can implement a firewall on the computer that's sitting right in front of you, meaning a host or personal firewall. But we also have network-based firewalls that are going to protect our entire network. We have firewalls that are going to be software and hardware based, and by default, Windows has their own firewall itself. Now, I would not recommend, again, I would not recommend completely depending on Windows Firewall and Windows Defender. Now, this is great that it comes with tools by default, but there are versions that are going to go well beyond what Microsoft Office, or excuse me, Windows offers for free. Free is great, but free is worth free, right? Now, you don't have to get something above and beyond that, but there are a lot of third-party options that would definitely do a better job when used in combination with what Windows offers already. So we've talked about different authentication methods, and I want to ask you again really quick, how many different type of authentication factors are there? Now, if you said 3, you're correct. Something you are, something you know, and something you have. And you'll see up there, username and password is something that you know. Biometrics is something that you are. And a token is an example of something that you have. All right, so hopefully you got those right. Just a quick random quiz for you. Now tell me again, what is multi-factor authentication? Say it out loud. Nobody's listening, hopefully. All right, so multi-factor is when you use 2 or more factors to authenticate somebody. That doesn't mean asking them 100 things that they know. That means asking them 1 or more things from different factors. I'm asking you to produce a piece of information that you would know, as well as maybe a physical ID, something that you have. So I need to be able to request different factors or pieces from different factors so that I can have you authenticate from more than one way, aka multi-factor authentication. And the last one, and I know we talked about this before, what is mutual authentication? Again, say it out loud if you can, it helps you remember. All right, if you said something like, all parties in a session must authenticate before the session can start, then you're right on track. This is when all the parties that are going to come to the table and have a conversation authenticate before the conversation starts, meaning everyone identifies themselves so we know the right people are in the room. So let's talk about passwords really quickly and how yours might kind of suck. It might not. If you have a long password and it uses special characters and it's not a word that I can guess, then you're doing pretty good. But all too often, people are using really, really simple passwords and they're just creating them a vulnerability. Or if your password is so long and so complex that you couldn't remember it, so you write it on a sticky note and put it somewhere obvious, well, that's great for someone who's trying to digitally hack or attack you. But if I sit down at your desk and I can jump into all of your systems, well, that's just not safe at all. All right, some of the things that we can implement network-wise to go beyond just physical access and having anti-malware. Well, we can restrict permissions for people that shouldn't have permission to go places. That doesn't mean not let people in the building, but that means not let people in certain parts of the building. Now, on the digital side, that doesn't mean not letting people log in. It just means when they log in, they should only have access to where they need to have access to. VPNs. So if you're going to connect or create a session and grab some data, maybe from a file server, or you want to remote in from home, a virtual private network is a good thing to have in place. And this is to make sure that you authenticate to a certain server before you get access to any network in resources. Meaning I can't just log in randomly and grab things that I shouldn't have access to. DLP stands for data loss prevention or data leakage prevention. Either one of those answers is going to be correct. But have you ever seen in the movies where somebody's sneaking out little pieces of data every day from their workplace and they're trying to reconstruct this cool program or this big list of fancy, special, secure things at home? Well, that's data leakage. That means that at some point we are losing data, whether in big or little chunks, and we want to prevent that. So DLP are the steps we take to make sure that doesn't happen. And one of those steps can be disabling physical ports, meaning I'm not going to let somebody copy any information from our servers or from their computer onto a USB and take it home or to a competitor or anywhere else. Now, ACLs is something I want you to remember. So take notes, take flashcards, repeat it as many times as you need. An access control list is one of the most common things we have in IT. Everything has a list, and this is how we control access to our network and different parts of our network once you're on it. ACLs, 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 write it down. All right, so I've already talked about this, but I love this picture because it is going to give you a better idea, per se, of what port disabling is. Now, physical port disabling, like I talked about with USBs, is pretty easy to envision, but the digital port disabling can be a little different. So when we're filtering ports or disabling ports, we're just saying that certain information can literally not be transferred on our network if it's not on a certain port. So any ports that you're not using should be disabled, and it'll prevent intruders from accessing your network through one of those ports that's just sitting open and pretty much waiting to be attacked. Now, port filtering is the technique of selectively enabling or disabling TCP and UDP ports. Now, we talked about TCP versus UDP and the kind of transmission that is. But certain ports operate in both TCP and UDP, and some of them operate in only one or the other. So when we know that there should be no traffic on a certain port, we can actually close it. And that means if somebody tries to transfer data there, well, they'll have no luck. Now, port filtering works by looking at a packet's header. They look at the source address, the destination address, but most importantly, the port number. And if that port number is on the disabled list, again, no data is going through. All right, we're back. ACLs, access control lists. This is a set of data, usernames, passwords, IP addresses, MAC addresses, whatever, that we use to control access to a resource, whether it's our entire network or as simple as a specific file or folder. Now, these are the most commonly implemented to restrict access to resources. And one of the most popular versions of an ACL is a MAC address filter list, meaning only the MAC addresses from the devices I've told can communicate on the network, meaning I'm restricting access based on MAC address. Again, access control lists. Please put it into your brain. Do not let it escape. All right, let's go through these quickly. Smart cards, again, it's kind of like a credit card or a normal size ID card, but it has a little built-in smart memory chip. And there's information on that chip, and whatever machine you're putting it into is going to read the info and let you have access to whatever the resource is. Email filtering is our junk box, meaning that if for any reason our email system scans an incoming email and it doesn't necessarily like it, it's going to throw it into a separate folder to protect us from what it thinks is bad. Now, trusted software sources is something that we should all be partaking in, meaning we should only install software from a well-known creator or author or manufacturer. That means that it's safe, it's considered trusted. Some applications, when you're searching the internet, might not be trustworthy software, so you just need to make sure that it's not pirated, borrowed, copied, and stolen, and again, that it doesn't have malware attached to it. Now, when we were file sharing more often a few years back per se, downloading all of our favorite books and movies and music, well, viruses were being traded just as fast. So make sure you obtain your software from a well-known source. Mobile devices can be hacked and attacked all the same as actual computers. So when we talk about mobile device security, this is everything as simple as enabling screen lock to advanced as making sure that your device has encryption enabled. So there's lots of different things that you can do to protect your mobile device. Now, data wiping is for anything that is lost or stolen. So if you left your phone in your Uber, your Lyft, or maybe somebody grabbed it and ran away, if you have enabled, and I mean previously enabled, before your phone gets stolen, if you've enabled remote wipe, that means that you can actually jump on via computer or a different cell phone and wipe your phone all the way back to factory settings. Now, another thing you can do to help track your device is make sure that GPS is enabled. And once those two things are on, and again, you've gone into your admin panel per se, Apple has a version of this, but I'm more familiar with Android. There's this thing called an Android Device Manager. And this is where you will not only enable these features, but then you can actually use them. So if you have that enabled and everything's set up, and for any reason your phone disappears, you can lock it, you can make it ring at full blast so you can find it, and if it has actually been stolen, then you can remote wipe it back to factory settings. So nobody's going to steal all your pictures and awesome data. Now, phones get viruses, just like computers. So you need to make sure that your phone has antivirus, just like your computer. Now, there are some free versions out there that are pretty good, and there are some paid versions that are even better. Go out there, look at reviews, and find the best option for you. And the last thing is making sure that you install updates and patches as they come out. Just like full-blown computers, your phones are going to have updates. Make sure they're installed so it can perform at its peak. All right, so we've got old data running around, and at some point we don't need to keep it anymore. We pay lots of money and we have lots of resources dedicated to storing data for years and years and years. Now, you personally probably have maybe a little place in your house that you have tax information and important documents that you don't necessarily need all the time, but just in case. But you're only one person. Think about a company of 500 or 5,000 people. Do you know how much data they have? And it expires at some point. They may have tax records for the past 10 years and all of their employee notes and HR stuff for the past 10 years, but they might only need to be hanging on to 5 years of it or whatever it may be. So what's the best way to get rid of this data? Let's not just throw it in the dumpster and push it onto somebody else, because there's this thing called dumpster diving, and it doesn't really smell good, but it happens a lot. So the first thing we should do in regards to our data is shred it. Recycle or repurpose is an option, but we'll talk about that in a second. If we need to physically destroy our data, whether it's on paper or on a disk, physical destruction is usually the best option. And I can't stand people thinking that stepping on a drive or throwing it in the trash is destroying it. It's not. You need to shred this stuff into tiny, tiny pieces. And there are machines that actually physically shred whole drives. They eat them up into little pieces, kind of like those machines that eat cars into tiny pieces of metal. You can put your drives through one of those. Now, you can burn it and you can drill holes through it, and those are pretty effective as well. Smashing is fun, and degaussing means to apply a magnet. Electromagnetic waves, same thing. You're going to expose it to interference and electromagnetic. There's a certain way I want to say this, and it's not coming to mind. But you're going to apply it to a magnetic component until the device is unreadable and the data is unrecoverable. So now that I've stumbled all over that sentence and explanation. Anyways, the point is, throwing something away is not good enough. You have to take the next steps to make sure that nobody can recover this data. Let's take a moment to look at how this works if we choose to only destroy the data, but not necessarily physically destroy it. So you can format a disk by deleting a file system and all the data that's on it. You can do this to any disk so that you can reuse it in the future. Now, the proper formatting should be conducted to prevent any data remnants, which means there are different types of formatting and you need to pick the one that's best for you, and you may end up formatting a disk multiple times. So low-level formatting is where you write track sectors, you're writing on track sectors to overwrite the data. Per se, you're formatting it to just blank it out. It's pretty much just using an eraser on a piece of paper. It's really easy for an attacker to undo this process. High-level formatting, aka standard formatting, is where your operating system will build files on top of those files and tear apart the partitions, and it tests the different sectors of your disk to verify that the reliability used to hold data is pretty much gone. And you're replacing that information, you're writing over it over and over again, and then erasing it. So it's much harder, per se, to recover or recoup any of that data. All right, so if you're going to recycle a hard disk or any of your electronics, you need to make sure that you've wiped the data before you pass it on to the next person, and that they're sanitized, per se, meaning that they're clean and ready for new data to be put on them. You are done with this section. You have survived. That was a lot, but it's because security is a big deal. And there are a lot of different parts to it. So we learned about different types of malware, different physical and procedural controls that you can put into place, as well as how to destroy data when it's just not necessary anymore. Well, we have one more section on security, and it's a pretty important one and one of my favorites. So don't get bored with this, because I know this is entry level for a lot of you and you're aware of these things, but you need to be reminded of the basics and how to prevent some of these things from happening to you. The other important part of this is that you're getting the right vocabulary in your mind. We might think of everything as a virus, but the fact is it's malware, and a virus is a certain type of malware. So those are the kind of details that you're taking out of these classes to make sure that you are going to be successful on your certification. And once you get certified, you can go get that job or ask for that raise and have proof of how much more information and data and work you're able to do because you know this stuff now. All right, get ready for a little bit more security information, and then I think a quiz is coming. See you soon.